All right, we are beginning a regular meeting of the Norwich Planning Commission. We have not just a quorum, I believe we have all members present in person or remotely. So thank you everyone for showing up.
Motion to approve the
Let's,
agenda?
okay, approve any, do I have a second on the agenda? Bob, any comments, additions within limits or changes to the agenda? All those in favor of the agenda as written?
Aye.
Thank you. Is there any public comment for items not on the agenda?
There is no public here.
There's no public there. I see Jeff Lubell. He's probably interested in things that are on the agenda. So I think we can move forward. Correspondence I did not see other than there's nothing marked in the packet as linked to correspondence. So we don't have anything that we're calling correspondence, correct? Okay, so we can jump that. I just wanted to give, as we get into the meat of this here, and people, we've been doing this for a few weeks, so I think people know the drill, but we're getting in kind of the cadence of it, and Stephen's helping obviously to get things organized and prepped so we can make the most of these meeting times. And I think you can see it actually in the there's attachments under number 5 on the agenda where it goes confirm on 1, discuss on 3, and then review on 4. So there are essentially 8 topics there. And what we're trying to do is move each topic, kind of focus on one topic at a time and move them from review. Review is first put it on the table, figure out what the key policy issues and decisions are. What's the state telling us we have to do versus what might we want to do? That's review. We discuss the points, we decide, and then we confirm what we are proposing, intending for that topic. And then the goal is to get all 8 of these topics or any others, or we consolidate them across to the confirm line, and then we'll have the whole bundle, and then we can say, okay, now we write it up in absolute detail, we write up the memorandum that's required to explain it, and we start the whole public hearing, public notification process. So that's why those words confirm, discuss, and review are kind of there pointedly. And the goal would be, if it's in the confirm column, we shouldn't really be talking about it. We just say, yep, that's what we thought. We don't want to be, there is not a revisit column here. There's not, we don't want a label that says revisit unless there's really good reason something's changed. Somebody brings up something we didn't know, that kind of thing. But it should be a one-way street from review all the way to confirm and out. It may take maybe slow going down that street for some issues, but that's what we're working through. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay. So the one that's in the confirm category, which I think we've beaten pretty sufficiently, is lot consolidation. The wording is there in the first piece in the packet. So I am, as I said, going to take it that without exceptional new information, we just move past the confirmed ones to the next. Okay. So then we're on to ADUs. And maybe, Stephen, you got the format here. I think it looks consistent, but just if you want to restate it, it looks like we've got statute background and then proposed language for each of these. So you want to point that out, walk us through ADUs?
Yeah, so, as you sort of follow along, I described the purpose. The point of this is to, provide legislative compliance, ultimately replacing 2 sections of our current land use regulations with the recommended amendments. There's been conversation in both the Affordable Housing Subcommittee and, in open meeting at the planning commission level. And there's been some back and forth and some suggestions based on discussion from our last meeting is that we really sort of consider the initial proposal of 50% of the floor area and 2,000 square feet, with some members feeling that perhaps that was a bit too generous. And I had some concern that it sort of stretched the definition of subordinate to a primary dwelling. So in discussion within the the Affordable Housing Committee, we came up with a proposal. If you can turn to the second page where we describe the floor area. This is essentially the size threshold, being 30% of the principal dwelling or 1,200 square feet, whichever is greater. That review was sort of based on looking at other municipalities and with the understanding that bylaws could be less restrictive than the definition of an accessory dwelling unit found in statute.
Okay.
Mary, I see you have a question.
Yeah, thanks. I was reading this today. Thanks for all this work. And I noticed that throughout Vermont, they have this idea that the size of these accessory dwelling units can be, we've presented it as 1,200, which I like a lot better than 2,000, or 1/3 of the footprint of the primary residence. And I guess I was surprised both in the state and in our work that we are saying greater than rather than less than. So what it says to me is that if someone has a 6,000 square foot home, they can have a 2,000 square foot accessory dwelling unit, or somebody has a 8,000 square foot home, and I'm sure there are a couple of those around, that they can have a third. So I guess I wondered why it was greater than rather than less than, and said, we think 1,200 square feet is what we want. I think Jeff Lubell's point that can be for a family with a child, great. But I didn't understand why we would give people who already have very large homes the opportunity to have a very large accessory dwelling unit. Thanks.
Great.
Vince, let's go to Vince and then Jeff.
Ernie also has his hand up.
Okay, there, unmuted. Okay. Yeah, just kind of piggyback off that. I noticed in Stephen's correspondence, he mentioned the Heinsberg ordinance that kind of broke down. It wasn't just a flat 30%, 40%. It was based off of the home sizes. And that's kind of what Mary's getting at, is like, once you start getting to a certain size, you can, the ratios don't really match up anymore. But if you have a 1,500 square foot, you still don't want to make it extremely small. So I do like how they kind of didn't just do a flat ratio there. So I thought that was worth discussing our options there.
Yeah,
Can I just
if
respond
there's
to
a
that?
way to cap it, there's some minimum size. Whichever is greater. 1,200 is a good size, is a justifiable size. But if you then flip it and say, yeah, we can be 30% of 10,000, that's going the wrong way. So I should be able to craft some math words that get it to make sense. Ernie and then Jeff.
Yeah. What I'm concerned about is having ADUs being too small. Since my understanding of why this legislature actually passed the laws as in the manner that they have was to increase housing and basically increasing affordable housing. And so, first of all, I'm in favor at the very least, having a, that a minimum that I don't think there should be actually, I don't think there should be a maximum of how big an ADU can be, especially if it's going to be used for affordable housing. I think the idea here is, that it's along with the intent of the legislature, is to create affordable housing. And ADUs are a good way to do that. And it's sort of an efficient way too, because, you know, you're not doing any more subdivision, but you are still getting more housing. Or if you're subdividing something that's already been subdivided and is already a house lot. You know, and you know, Jeff's logic of you know, being, you want it at least 1,200 square feet for a family, I completely agree with, although you might need more than that for a family as well. I'm a little concerned about limiting ADUs when I'm also concerned about them being used as a means of bringing just more people with too much money and not enough brains into this town, which we already have a surfeit of to begin with. I think we need more affordable housing. And the general way we've been approaching it, you know, trying to buy a big piece of land and all that, none of that's worked so far in about 10 years that we've been pursuing this. I think this ADU idea is a good way to get the affordable housing, but we can't make it so that it's so constrained that affordable people needing affordable housing can't get the help of somebody who already owns a piece of land and maybe wants to help out with the process and puts a housing unit on it that's affordable. And you know, I'm of the belief that, you know, you can build a roomy enough house for a family with some good design, and it's not going to break the bank. I see a paucity of imagination in a lot of the affordable housing, and not just in this town, but everywhere I see it. It's all, you know, it's all like a way of getting money out of the government instead of doing what it's really about, which is making sure our neighbors are, you know, able to have a place to live. So I agree with the idea of at least 1,200 square feet and maybe even bigger. If we have to have a range, you know, it can't be any smaller than 1,200 feet. Well, no, I don't think we need to have students moving into the town either. They're not a group either that needs to be serviced in this town. I'm not saying we can't have them, but they don't need any extra special treatment. What we need is special treatment for the people that need affordable housing. And, you know, I also think that we should be giving tax breaks to somebody who puts affordable housing ADUs, so that if you need to have encouragement and you can't do something just on just goodwill, at least give them a tax break too.
Okay. Jeff Lubell and then Mary.
Yeah, thank you. Jeff Lubell, live on Spring Pond Road. Not a member of the Planning Commission, speaking in my own personal capacity. If I could just review quickly the legislative context here, because I think it actually is pretty binding on us. If you look at the page that says item 5B, there's a definition from statute of an ADU. And at a minimum, we have to allow an ADU that conforms with that definition. And that definition is that the unit does not exceed 30% of the total habitable floor area of a single family dwelling or 900 square feet, whichever is greater. That language on whichever is greater comes from the statute. We can't change that. So we have to allow at least that. So what we're proposing, and really given the feedback from the Planning Commission, is to increase the 900 to 1,200, right? Just so we get a better likelihood of getting some units for families. But we really can't say the lesser of, it just wouldn't conform with the statute, right? So we're just bound by the statute. I'm just explaining the situation that we're in. And I think we could adopt this definition from the statute, or we could make the slight variation that we're recommending, but we really don't have the ability to be more constraining than that and be in conformance with state law. So I'm sorry about that. That's just the law.
Don't be sorry, but yes, that's a useful point, Jeff. Thank you. That is one of our guiding assumptions here, is we're not going to beat our heads against the wall. If state statute says thou shalt, then if you want to fight about that, it's a different conversation. It's not the Planning Commission's.
Can I also just say really quickly that I agree with Ernie about the tax break, that if you rent out an ADU at an affordable level, it should affect the valuation of your property. And I've actually talked about that with state legislatures. So just so you know, I'm on board, Ernie, with that idea.
Yeah, I did want to, just for the sake of the conversation, I think it's useful to distinguish kind of the definitions and the language around what kind of housing stock we can build. How big can ADU be? How many on the lot? That sort of thing. And then mechanisms for making it more likely to be affordable, whatever that means. With the bare minimum or the things we've talked about being everything from just more housing stock makes it a little more likely. A diverse housing stock makes it a little more likely. And then all the way through, subsidized and very specifically regulated and rent controlled, or some portion of the buildings have to be to certain income levels. So, but they're two separate topics. How big do we let ADUs be? That makes sense. And then how do we make it more likely they're affordable, given that's a desire? Mary?
Yeah, thanks. No, and thanks, Jeff, for that explanation. Well, actually, that one clarifying question and then I've got another comment. In section 4.14, the recommended amendments, the highlighted area, that sentence, it says up to one accessory dwelling unit within or attached to a primary structure, and one accessory dwelling unit within an accessory use structure. So are we saying that someone could actually have 2 ADUs on a property? Is that an incorrect or correct reading? I'm trying to, there are a lot of ands there, and I wasn't sure what they're saying.
Yeah, thanks for calling it out. And in fact, I put this in discussion with some folks. I would like to actually suggest that we replace the "and" with "or." The context is you have a primary dwelling, a 2-car garage.
Right.
The idea, and what I think this is proposing, is that you could have an ADU in either the primary dwelling or above the garage, and a separate and detached accessory dwelling unit.
That's what I was wondering. That's a lot.
Yeah.
So that's 3 housing units on one lot.
If the septic capacity exists and there's no other factors, yes, that would be that's what this is suggesting.
Well, and just to clarify, we talked about this a little bit, Stephen, but my question was, how does that then relate to duplex? Because if part of state statute is essentially a duplex must be treated like a single, do we get to where maxing out a lot would actually be 4 dwelling units? Or does the duplex count as the other dwelling unit in the primary, in the principal?
Right.
Just so we bracket this thing. Jeff?
I did want to have one other
All right, Mary, go
follow-up.
ahead.
And that is that getting back to Ernie's comment around, what is the purpose? And I agree around the affordable housing. I'm uncomfortable with the idea that this could become an Airbnb enterprise the way things are currently written in the town. And I also, so I do wonder, and I've mentioned this before, whether there could be, if we want this for affordable housing, if we want it for workforce housing, have it be tied to 12-month-a-year rent, not short-term rentals. And think about tying changes in our ADUs with our, the short-term rental policy. And Ernie, that could keep out some of your favorite students.
Everybody's got their hands raised.
I do want to clarify short-term rental is an agenda item. It is certainly something you could talk about. To my second point there, where I said there are going to be mechanisms that make it more likely that new housing or housing is affordable, a short-term rental policy is a mechanism to help achieve that. So it's definitely on the list. It's not one of the 7 or 8 things. It's not in here now, but we certainly should put it on the table. It's on the agenda for future items. Stephen, you just want to clarify, and then Jeff?
Yeah, I was just going to say, at present, our bylaws are completely silent on short-term rentals. We do not have any concept of that.
Jeff?
Jeff's had his hand up for a bit.
Yeah. Jeff?
Yeah, so sitting here with a nice conversation with Steve about options. I mean, I like the notion long about more than one ADU on the site, but in consideration of what both Ernie and Mary said, and what the law says, if you will, I'd like to take a look at just saying, hey, we'll allow one ADU up to 1,200 square feet, and then for future purposes, whether it's leveraging affordability, whether it's 1 or 2 or more ADUs, we can address that in the future. For now, I'd like to stay with this baseline of up to 1,200 square feet as shown. And I don't think it has to be 30% of the total, given the mansion reality that's been addressed here.
Christian, you haven't chimed in yet.
Yeah, and maybe Steven or others who are more familiar, but my read of the statute is that, so the 30% or 900, like we have to leave that in to be in compliance with the state law. And then my read is that we can't make an ordinance or stipulate ADUs as short-term rentals in a way that singles out ADUs only for the short-term rentals. So like, am I reading that right under F2?
That's correct. But to your first point about the threshold, so in the statute 44-112, which describes bylaws and required provisions of those, if you look down, it says F. Nothing in the subdivision of 1E shall be construed to prohibit a bylaw that is less restrictive of accessory dwelling units. And I take that to read that the size is defined. We can have a less restrictive size.
I agree. So, but I think our base, we have to allow for 30% and 900. If we want to do 30% 1,200, we could. If we want to do 40% and 1,200, we could. But 30%, we have no.
We can't go lower than that.
And to your point, Christian, which I think is a useful statement just to have in everybody's head, we couldn't say we have a short-term rental policy that only applies to ADUs.
And that's per the state law on ADUs. So we could make a townwide policy on short-term rentals, but it would have to apply to all housing stock equally, not just ADUs.
Probably.
So, Stephen, can we just, because I know we're going to need it and we're talking about it now, I would like to ask you to do the first round of digging into short-term rental policies. I know Woodstock has done something, I believe Windsor maybe, but so let's get some things on the table, statute, enabling statute, other towns' ideas. Let's get us a little more intelligence about that topic.
Yeah, it's a real emerging topic right now.
Ernie, then Jeff?
Yeah, it just seems to me that I don't know if your discussion, confirming and all that sort of stuff, agenda way of dealing with the agenda is completely going to work in this situation, because we really still need to address, because ADUs have that at least a double purpose. They can be for housing and they can be for short-term rentals. It really seems that we have to sort of discuss them at the same time. And so, you're saying that the short-term rentals is down the road a bit. And so I don't mind continuing this discussion, but I would like to make sure that we understand that it could be, this discussion here can be continued when we start discussing the short-term rentals as well.
Yeah. Yeah,
and
I think
and maybe any other units, we
can pause, we can get this, maybe if we get to a place the 30%, I agree, that looks like we can't avoid it. That's statute driven. If we get general agreement in the group on the 1200, then we may be in a place, and then talk through the, is it a one in the primary and one in an outbuilding sort of thing. So let's get those things determined, and then we could park ADU and then bring short-term rental up with a little more conversation before continuing both. Jeff?
Yeah, Jan, I mean, talking to legislators, the legislators are not thinking about Norwich or Woodstock or a town or two around Burlington when they're talking about ADU size, 30%, et cetera. And so to move this forward, to the extent we stay with 30% or 1,200, I'd like to propose that for up to one ADU. And then we can contemplate additional ADUs going forward. If we said more than one ADU, 30%, we could have. And there are some mansions in town that would allow two ADUs at 3,000 square feet or 4,000 square feet, because we have some structures that are big. So I'd like to move off the dime on this. If we have to stay with 30%, I agree with what Steve said about less restrictive and up to 1,200 square feet. I'd like to go with that.
So you're really speaking to the second, the primary, one can be in the primary structures and not doing that, at least at this stage.
But we can allow, so from my standpoint, one ADU, whether it's with the accept on top of the garage or in the primary structure, either way, allow either or. Not
One or
both.
the other. Okay.
I would like to allow more than two, frankly, going forward, but not until we resolve the 30% issue going forward.
Okay. Vince?
So there we go. Let's see, where was I? The other question I had was about, since we're talking about things being up, for example, being over a 2-car garage, like if you have a house that, an 1,800 square foot house that has a 2-car garage next to it that has a 1,200 square foot apartment on top of it, how does that play into the clearly subordinate language? And I was just kind of curious how that would kind of play out. And the other thing in that same vein, if someone has an existing like large barn and they carve out 1,200 square feet, is that something that's also, is that allowed? Like what's the, I guess, regulations there on the building with non-livable space in it?
Yeah, and the statute addresses at least your second question, describing criteria for converting an existing structure, existing detached non-residential building to habitable space shall not be more restrictive than the criteria for single-family dwelling without an accessory dwelling. So I think the statute sort of packages, the idea if you have a pre-existing structure, you can convert that to an ADU as long as you comply with the criteria in the same way that you would a single family home.
So you'd be limited by the square footage in that situation.
Yeah.
Okay.
And
the square footage of the ordinance or the square footage of the existing structure that you're fixing up?
Yes.
It would be the 30% of the primary dwelling.
Okay. So if you had a big barn next to a medium-sized house, you could not make an ADU of the whole footprint of the barn?
No.
Okay.
And I mean, that does create some awkward situations in practice where you literally have to, like, what is that extra space, right? So you build a 1,200 square foot apartment in a 6,000 square foot barn, which is, seems a bit impractical, but that's, that's an edge case, and we have to sort of literally interpret what it says. So we can't restrict it. If there's an existing structure, we can't say, no, you can't convert that to an ADU.
Right. Okay. Ernie?
I'm just going to pause at an example and find out which way this would go. But say someone has adequate land for, expansion, putting another unit on it, and they have the septic all that sort of stuff. But they have a house that's, let's say 1,500 square feet. Are they still constrained by the percentage, or can they build whatever size ADU they want up to a, assuming that let's say they're interested in affordable housing. Are they able to build a family size house, let's say the same size as the original house?
Well, to your
No.
example, if they had a 1,500 square foot house, could they build a 1,200 square foot ADU next to it? At
Well,
what?
I'm saying, could they build a 1,500 square foot ADU? And why not? Why is there a limit? Especially if the house was going to be for affordable housing?
Because I think it sort of fails the test of subordinate
Mhm.
being equal in size.
Okay.
So on appeal, your neighbor could say, point to the definition and say, this is clearly not subordinate. Therefore, I'm appealing your decision to issue that permit, and so on.
Jeff?
So it creates risk.
Okay, because I'm trying to figure out what's the point of the subordinate dominant.
I don't know, you have to talk to the
Yeah, that's
legislature.
state, again, state regs are different than
okay.
things that
All
we
right.
can talk about. The
All right.
state regs
That's
say
not- I
it's
didn't come up
subordinate.
with it.
Okay,
And,
so
to be clear, right now, the way our bylaws are written, we are not in compliance with state law. So, I think we need to recognize that there is some urgency to fix this aspect of our land use regulations. It's something I talk to people about on a weekly basis, if not a daily basis. Residents of the town of Norwich who, want to build ADUs, but, are sort of facing this, process that isn't in compliance with state law.
Yeah. Jeff, then Christian?
Yeah, so what I'm trying to do is move this forward. To the extent it says 30% or 1,200 square feet, even though I don't agree with the 30%. I'd like to kick it off and just go with it. So we know that regardless of the primary structure size, you can build an ADU up to 1,200 square feet, just one. And let's move forward.
Okay. Understand.
Is there consensus with that?
Yeah, I was good. So, Christian, do you want to, is it
Yeah.
same topic, or do you
Yes,
want?
exactly same topic. I'm happy to move forward.
Go
I
ahead.
guess I'm not entirely sold on that we have to limit it to one if they're if you have, for example, a garage space and you can make a 600 square foot apartment above a detached garage and it's a small apartment, and then you also want to add a 900 square foot standalone unit, like I'm not opposed. I don't think to Jeff's point, like people who are coming and buying 10,000 square foot houses are doing that with the intent with a beautiful Vermont view of everything and tons of acreage. They're coming up here to unintentionally subdivide and put 4,000 square foot houses on their property and rent it. I just don't think that's practical. So
No.
I would take it as like, I'm open to move forward, but I'm just curious the rest of the group's thought on if it's one or more.
Yeah, well, let me just propose something in the interest of moving forward, because we have, as we talked about, we'll get new information on short-term rental and other possible sort of influences towards affordability. But if the base starting point here is the 30% and 1,200 and one ADU, then we take that as it gets us to be in agreement with state law, and it gets us sort of a toehold in this issue. Then when we pull forward some conversation about short-term rental policy and any other clever ideas we can have thinking through these scenarios that say, all right, if we were going to open it up to a second, here's the language that would help that be acceptable. I could see this being kind of a two-stage thing, but the baseline, if we have consensus on it, would be single unit, 30%, 1,200. Mary?
Yeah, I agree. I support what Jeff has proposed and what you just responded. The other thing I'm not totally clear about, if you have multiple ADUs on one property, is what does that mean for parking? And, I think that, so that's the other, I think, again, if somebody, as Christian says, got 25 acres out in middle of middle of Norwich, that's one thing, but if it's downtown, I think that's something we need to, and we can handle that at a later time.
Okay.
Like the next topic.
Yeah, I think so. That's good. I like that as a, we've got a solid piece to this, and then we've got a few messy bits around the edges that we can clean up as the thing moves forward. But let's hold to the solid part in the middle for starters.
Yeah.
Stephen?
And yeah, just one last thought on the topic of providing accessory dwelling units and attached units. It's a really common condition. Like I get a lot of questions about that. I think people build houses, new single family homes with garages, sort of with the idea that at some point they'll put an ADU in it. And I want to provide as much flexibility to the process and, for people. So I would recommend, my view is that we allow, in a pre-existing accessory structure, an ADU and one detached, if the septic capacity and the lot can support it.
So what I'm hearing, just a second, Jeff, what I'm hearing right now, Stephen, is that we can get consensus on step one here. And then there's some agreement to what you just said that, okay, let's be a little more liberal and have it allow a second, but we need a little more thought and a little more
Sure.
context with short-term rentals and just how would you do that with big houses? If, to Jeff's point, depending what the state, is the state going to think through this a little bit and change some 30% stuff for huge houses, that's the second more complex layer. Let's park what we got and move.
Yep.
I think, and then just keep that in mind as we talk about the other stuff. Jeff?
Yeah, I just want to move forward with the 30%, 1,200. I'm not opposed to 6 accessory dwelling units if it makes sense. But that's going to be sometime down the road, to the extent we can leverage affordability, which we're not doing now. Let's just comport with the state law. I do have one quick question, because on the page where it talks about, the 30%, 1,200, there's table 3.3 at the bottom. I'm assuming that goes with the parking component.
It does, because, this is a category of use. I'm sort of annotating where we would need to make updates in the bylaws specifically. So table 3.3 is one area, then all of the, all of our two.
Yeah, so while I agree with that, I'd like to come back. I'm going to not contest what Steve is suggesting, but I'd like to come back at some point on a future agenda, talk about flood hazard overlay, shoreline protection, which I don't think are well poised today. So for now, I'll just yield the floor on.
Yeah,
And if I'm not mistaken,
topics.
Stephen, you're having conversation with the regional commission, or at least some of their comments encourage simplifying our shoreline overlays and things like that, right?
Yes, yeah, I'm sort of in advance reviewing those districts to simplify. Two Rivers offered in a project that they have ongoing to review our flood hazard regulations, which I've received and we'll look at a later date.
Okay. Yep. Ernie, you got something on ADUs before we move?
Yeah, well, it's basically on Jeff's letter, where he's talking about density bonuses and proposed new policy.
Okay, well, wait a second. Let's move. That's the next or a next topic. So let me just.
Okay, I was wondering, is it that tonight or is
Yeah,
that?
it's still ADUs and or affordable housing encouragement, but so do we have consensus of the group that right now we're gonna in the move to the confirmed state, we do single ADU 1,200 30%, and that is where we park that until we get more information. Okay.
Yep.
Great. All right.
Yeah.
So let's take that, and then the next, just to keep going in order, We'll get to what you're talking about, Ernie, but I'm just going to take it in order so we don't get lost in the packet.
Okay.
Next thing is parking. So Stephen, do you want to
Yeah.
walk us through that gripping topic?
Yes, yeah, this highly technical section. So both Act 47 and Act 181 mandated changes within the statute for standards. The idea here is to update our parking standards to comply with those new items. So essentially, we're going to replace section 3.09, parking and loading requirements, with the recommended amendments. And I'm absolutely open to suggestion here. One of the members did a sort of deep dive on this, and you know, I'm not going to stand in the way of any of these ideas, but you know, I sort of want to bring it to discussion. You know, just to point out, there is a mechanism within this section to modify these parking requirements through conditional use review and site plan review by the Development Review Board. So, you know, there is scope to deal with specific proposals that may not comply. So,
Can I just ask, Stephen, I see a lot of detail there, and I definitely appreciate that getting in the right place and being checked. What are call them the policy points here? What is actually substantive that we're changing versus tweaking, you know, the exact size of a parking space or something? What is key here?
well, you know, what's key is that we comply with the parking standards established in statute. Okay, so those are the dimensions. We can't make a parking spot larger than or smaller than 9 by 18. That's in statute. Our bylaws have to comply with that. There is exceptions for ADA compliant parking, which are explicit in Act 181. So on the second page, all of my comments, those are directly related to amendments to state law that are requirements. I mean, our land use regulations have to comply with. That's basically the point. Also, you know, I've simplified it a bit in terms of layout. Section 3.09 was overly complex, I would say. In its specificity, this is more general, sort of talking to general uses, and reduces in certain circumstances the number of mandatory parking spaces by use. So currently, for any single family home, our land use regulations require two parking spots. This recommends one. For office space, 2 per 1,000 square feet. The current regulations are in excess of that. So it sort of withdraws mandatory parking, reduces mandatory parking, and complies with the current legislation. And
Okay.
I agree. I mean,
That answers my question in the sense that the substantive change is in some cases to reduce the mandatory requirements for parking.
That is, yes.
Okay, Jeff?
Yeah, going through this with Steve, and I appreciate that he sort of captured some of my thoughts. I think item G on the comment section at the bottom, I'd like to allow the DRB, as Steve alluded to case by case, decide what the parking requirement will be. I've seen cases where, you're required to have 300 parking spaces, but in practice, you might need 50. So the flip side of that is if the DRB has a condition that says to the extent, 50 is not enough, demonstrate that you have capacity for 500 or 200 if and when. So I'd like to give that discretion to the DRB. To Steve's
Mhm.
point under, when it says, in the middle of the page, 24 VSA, 4428 under B, it says that, parking space size standards. So the purpose of residential parking, a municipality shall define a standard parking space is not larger than 9 by 18. However, the municipality may allow a portion of the parking space to be smaller for compact cars. So what I'm seeing in municipalities in both states is a reduction to 16 feet in the compact context, particularly where there's parking, say in a commercial context against a sidewalk because of bumper overhang. When you look at the bumper on a pickup, there's about 3 feet that sticks out of that. So I would say that I don't think the rule says you can't have a parking space smaller than 18 feet in length. But that, so I'd like to say we can allow up to 9 by 16 in the context of a specific site plan or conditional use review.
Yeah, and
Yep.
I don't think we're capturing that in this right now. So what I would, in order to address that, I would, in the recommended amendments under item C, I would, make an allowance for compact cars to, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So one other question, folks, since we're just kicking through this, under E setbacks. So I believe that with conditional use approval, if we have 2 neighboring lots that might allow shared parking, in the context of shared parking lot to lot, I would like to say we might eliminate the 5-foot setback, the minimum 5-foot setback. I understand the 5-foot minimum generically, but when you have shared parking, Danowitz with some, neighboring properties, I don't see the need for that 5-foot setback. It's unnecessary.
I agree.
Yeah.
So would you see this, would we express that on a district basis? So in, village business, village residential?
I might go conditional use site plan. It could in theory be you've got parking on a residential parcel and an abutting parcel. So maybe with those 2 adjoining parking spaces, you don't need that.
Okay,
I've seen that be, so, thanks, Steve.
yeah,
Sorry, Jan, I apologize for the back and forth.
No, I like it. That's fine. That's the quickest way to do it when we're trying to answer that question. So I guess I'd ask the group that looking at this and hearing the issues that are on the table, are we satisfied and happy with the things that are being proposed? Nobody's jumping up and down saying, no, don't do that. And then if Stephen, if you understand the details of the editing that are needed to go to the next step, then I think we're in good shape here.
I agree. I think what I suggest we do is, I take the members' comments and, and please feel free to provide comment at any time. And you revise the document and we can confirm, consensus at the next meeting on this stuff based on those changes.
Right. So this one, I think, from the point of view of decision making relative to the policy issues here,
Yeah.
we can move into the confirm section. We can edit and confirm rather than debate specific issues. Okay. Good. All right. Let's talk farm related, ag related things. And I think so we've definitely got some substantive policy issues associated with this one. So let's give it a little bit of time. And Stephen, if you can give us the background and kind of identify the topics for discussion here.
Sure. So this is sort of twofold. One, based on a sort of common use, we have businesses, agricultural businesses in the town of Norwich that are, sort of acting under the accessory on-farm business statutes. Our bylaws are silent on that act, and this is an attempt to sort of frame that existing use within the legislative context. So that would apply to any accessory on-farm business which complies with the state's definition of an accessory on-farm business, which are you have to be a registered farm, you have to comply with the required agricultural practices in order to to have this use. Act 143, which sort of created this notion, it's really sort of a compromise between absolute no regulation, municipal regulation allowed for agricultural uses, and this sort of emerging new kind of economic resource for farmers, which are to have these on-farm businesses. So it's a compromise that allows some municipal regulation through site plan review and conditional use review, but still sort of is an attempt to preserve the lack of municipal regulation for agricultural uses. So that's one aspect. The other is to sort of exempt temporary roadside farm stands by providing some criteria and definition of what those are. And third is to sort of accommodate an accessory on-farm business like, so a use that is similar to an accessory on-farm business, but is off. So that would be, that sort of falls under the category of open air markets. So we have three categories: an open air market, an on-farm business, and a sort of temporary roadside agricultural stand. So that would be somebody selling eggs or pumpkins, some sort of seasonal component. An accessory on-farm business needs to comply with the rules for accessory on-farm businesses. And off-farm, farmers market, we also don't have a use category for that. And I think that's, there's a number of existing open air markets in the town that we don't have definitions for.
Okay, all right, so I think that's good framing of it is to divide it into those three topics because they're distinct and they each have their own state regs and kind of concerns and policy questions. Can we maybe lop one off that might be the easiest for on the temporary roadside farm stand? Are there concerns or issues or topics associated with that, or can we kind of be done with that one and move to meatier topics?
So that's found on the second page. So we would define, this would be, a sort of specific use category in our bylaws, or a simple definition in our bylaws with some criteria, describing that use. And if, the thing complies with these criteria, then it would be exempt from permitting.
I'd like to go further, Jan. So under roadside ag stands, I'd like to put that whole section up to say fine. So,
Say that again, Jeff.
so it says roadside agricultural stands with
Yeah.
section 602 exemptions underneath it. If we knock that one thing off as one topic, that's fine with me.
Sorry.
You're combining roadside agricultural stand and temporary roadside agricultural stands?
Yeah, so it talks about roadside ag stands with an exemption. I would lump all that, for me, I just soon pass all that forward and say good to go, as it is.
Does that make sense, Steve?
Yeah, it does.
Okay.
So in our list of exemptions, a temporary roadside agricultural stand would be among that, those exemptions, as long as it complied with the criteria that defines the temporary use or the roadside farm stand.
Okay. Ernie?
I've been having difficulty understanding Jeff and sometimes Steve too tonight. It's like,
Yeah, the sound is worse on Jeff for me. I don't know where.
I don't really know what he was even talking about a lot. And I mean, sometimes I don't know what he's talking about anyway, but I mean, in this particular case, it's not his fault.
Just to restate that specifically, Ernie, what I heard Jeff say, go ahead, let me just summarize and then we can see. But I do think the sound of the owl on Jeff's is worse. But what Jeff was proposing, Ernie, specifically on the bottom of that second page where it is, there are two separate bold items, roadside agricultural stands, and then the 6.02 exemptions temporary, was to essentially clump those, to combine those in a single entity for conversation, for the writing it up. So that was his proposal.
Okay, so my question is, what is the section 6.02? 6.02 exemptions. What are those? I couldn't.
It's just that one line, I believe.
Oh,
temporary.
okay.
That's it.
All right, I get it.
And so that the roadside agricultural stands, where it is defined as temporary roadside stands for the sale of ... That's the definition of the thing that is exempted.
Okay.
Okay. Except we lost Stephen. What, do you get another owl?
Yeah, ready to go?
Okay. So are we all set on temporary stands, Vince? Muted.
I might just be misreading it or thinking about it too much, but the section A there that said it is not allowed to be within 20 feet of a lot line. Am I reading that properly? Because that's kind of the nature of a roadside
Side or rear?
stand.
Yeah, side or rear. So your road.
Not on the road.
Not on the front. Okay. I read that as lot line as the perimeter. Okay.
No, it's the side or rear limitation. So 3 out of 4 of the lot lines apply. The one on the road does not have a
Got
set.
it. So we're just not messing with neighbors or butters or anything. Okay.
Right.
Yep.
Okay. That makes sense.
Okay. Okay. So let's park the temporary one. I think that one's the easy one. Do you on it so let's move to accessory on farm businesses. And this is the one with maybe the most. Jeff, do you have a process point, or on what topic?
Actually, all three of the remaining. I'm okay for talking to Steve, sparring together. Helpful, I would say. The notion of how this language is presented, I have a couple of typo questions, but the notion ultimately is that, for any application, there's going to be site plan review and conditional use review. And to the extent those threshold criteria are what capture each of these uses, I'm not going to offer any changes to the language that's here beyond a couple of typos.
Okay. And I think so, as I understand it, Jeff, and I would agree personally with this, in that to the degree that there may be, either ambiguity or scenarios you can think of, what if this and this happened or was proposed, to the degree that anything that's proposed has to go through site plan review and performance review, the DRB is the one that holds people to a reasonable standard. That's the important point. Mary?
Well, I mean, I would like to think that that's true, but this one worries me. And we talked about it last time. We have I think the example that we talked about at Nora's place, where since Charlotte owned it, now has they call it a biofuel plant on it that's been built because it gets a farmland exemption. It has a store that sells all sorts of things, which I look at. I love North Shore. I stop there all the time. It has food trucks all there in the summertime. If you now say you can have people staying overnight and have dinners and tastings there, then pretty soon, do we end up with a restaurant, a hotel, a wedding venue, etc. But I think, Jeff, you were the one last time who said, it's out of compliance, and but are we gonna? But this just gives a opportunity to, I guess I worry, we've had what's happening there is not, I don't believe it's in accordance with what should be there. And now we are writing these things where we can, have more happening at different places. Maybe it's fine if there's one, but what if there's 5 or 6?
So just a second, Jeff, just to unpack that for a minute, because I think there were several layers to that. And one that, again, we always want to be clear about is what are the state statutes? Because there may be, whatever is happening there for a biomass thing compared to what they're selling in the store. Step one is going to be understand the state regs, and certainly there's language in the state regs that say you can have this percentage of your revenue come from these kinds of products, and that's clear, and we just have to comply with that. That's the state reg. But so we should make sure to kind of pry apart the various pieces of this and address them each. Jeff, did you have something to add?
Yeah, a couple things. I like the blue Mary's wearing. I love that color. Anyway, that said, complete with what Mary said for Sweetland Farm. And to Steve's point, we don't have a definition. I think they're out of compliance. So to the extent we adopt this language, anything further they do, they're done until they get, DRB conditional use review.
Site plan review. So if there's some, we need a mechanism in our bylaws to, when there is an expansion of use, to refer to and require, the authority that the statute gives us, which is site plan review. So that's a formal process by the DRB. There's, review criteria, and, and they're looking at adverse effects to the neighborhood, parking, traffic, noise. So
answer me, just take that for a second, because I think that's a very important point in addressing concerns and changes over time.
Yeah.
We have a mechanism, we have the review mechanism, site plan review, performance review, DRB, we got that. So the question on the table is what can trigger that process for an existing property? What change would trigger it? And I guess I would ask the question, what does that look like in the current bylaws? And what might we propose to change if we want to? And then the third question that's always there, what does state statutes say about it? But just to that, what triggers site plan review on an existing use?
If it was established in our bylaws, any expansion of that aspect of their business that qualifies as an accessory on-farm business. So if they, for example, wanted to begin hosting a weekly event in the summer, we could require if it's new, that aspect go through site plan review. So any expansion
would it take changes to our current bylaws to
right,
have
yeah,
that
right now
trigger?
our bylaws are absolutely silent on this use. There's no reference to accessory on-farm businesses. And as you can see, the definition, the legal definition of an accessory on-farm, if you're eligible, is quite broad.
Right.
It's a retail component, an event component, a lodging component.
Right.
So,
But if I ask the question more broadly, the triggering, existing use change that triggers review, is our bylaws silent to that entire topic, not even limited to accessory on-farm business?
what do I guess,
If somebody wants to, clearly, if somebody's going to subdivide or if somebody's going to build a house, we say that triggers these
any,
things. If there's essentially a change of use that's more of a creep nature, it's less
any change of
dramatic.
use from, a permitted use, either conditional or by right. If there's a change of use, that is the triggering event. Any expansion.
Okay, so we
So
would
adding an
be
addition to your
we would be
house.
defining, we would be adding some definition to change of use around accessory on-farm business as a clarification of that. But there is an existing overall overarching statement that changes of use require permits or
Right.
at least review.
Right.
Okay, Ernie, and then Jeff.
I'm just trying to figure out, and I'm being thick here, I think. Why there are limitations on agricultural activities that are on a farm. That, what is the outline of what's not, what has to be reviewed, what's just automatically permitted,
Mm.
and all that, because my understanding is that the state wants to encourage farming and wants to help farmers become prosperous. So, these on-farm activities, to me look like ways that people are trying to make money, beyond, without not being a farm. So, I mean, it seems that any of these regulations should be more or less determining what is something that you could expect to find on a farm. And you might find, I'm going to call them dude ranches because I can't think of what you would call them in New England. That would actually be a reasonable thing, if somebody wants to do that. You'll find square dances, you'll find all kinds of things, that are entertainment that aren't really farm, but they are farm, what farmers would do, certainly in the past. Some of these things would be what farmers would do automatically. So I'm not 100% comfortable even with regulating this stuff very much. Because
Well, Ernie, just because I think what Steve said at the beginning was helpful for me relative to that question, which is the state is trying to help farmers survive.
Yep.
So it's expanding the realm of what it's calling farm related to be a pretty big spread. And because it wants to expand that pretty far, then it's letting the towns do a little bit of regulation rather than none. That's my understanding, so that they have more likelihood of succeeding financially. But because it's a stretch to a traditional farm, the towns are allowed to have a little say.
Okay, so I was being a little thick. Okay. That's in keeping with the character. One question I then have is, there are some comments, and how much, on the column, there's like 3 comments. And one of the people seems to be saying it's okay to have temporary stuff, but it's not okay to have permanent stuff. That would be accessory on farm businesses. So, I mean, what weight are we supposed to give these comments?
Yeah, I would right now I would give them the weight that's equivalent to somebody chiming in on the meeting here now, unless there's, that's what it is. It's somebody doing that, talking to Stephen or whatever. I think one of those comments relates to open air markets and one of them relates to accessory on farm. So I just want to talk about one at a time if we can. So on accessory on farm business, I think one thing that's being proposed, Stephen, is to be a little more specific about changing use triggering some kind of a review. Is that, are you understanding that, or is that, do you understand
I-
what I mean by that?
I think that's generally,
Or is that already in there?
yeah, I don't think we need to specifically call it out for these types of uses. I think it's generally understood, you know, any expansion of use may require permitting.
So to your point, if a particular, and I don't want to focus on particular, if we're going to talk about specific businesses, we should be very clear we're doing it as examples to help us imagine things,
Yeah.
not because we're talking about who to permit and so forth. But if somebody says, oh, I'm going to have square dancing in my parking lot every Saturday night, or I'm going to have 10 food trucks on a weekly basis, or I'm going to open a dude ranch, a neighbor or some mechanism could raise their hand and say, I think you need to get reviewed.
Yeah, that you could, that is essentially, you know, an enforcement action. It's in violation of our, you know, existing, you know, the definition of an accessory on-farm business. It expands it too far beyond, or it doesn't. But, you know, and I get, you know, I guess there's a variety of remedies and those, you know, in the, you know, sort of various things, right? I mean, there's, but yeah, I mean, that's an enforcement action. If somebody expands their accessory on-farm business in a way that doesn't comply with this definition, then yeah, maybe they're in violation of our land use regulations. Or we can permit it via a site plan review process where,
or, you know, so that's, there's the enforcement mechanism is kind of the reactive mechanism. Preferably we do enough education beforehand about the regulations that people know when they need a permit. And it's not a reactive enforcement thing. It's somebody comes and says, I think I'm doing a change. Tell me what I need to do. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's just, you know, gating the authority that's given to us, to a municipality.
Yeah. Okay. Ernie, did you have something?
No, I forgot to put
Okay.
it
Yeah.
down.
Okay, Mary?
Yeah, no, I mean, I do, you know, if it's an enforcement, Stephen, does that mean that somebody does something and then someone has to come in and file a complaint if somebody, again, I'm all for farmers being successful and things. I just do worry that if all of a sudden someone makes their farm into a hotel or has a wedding business every weekend, if I live next door to them, that may not be what I am eager to have happening. So is it somebody can do it, then you react to it? Because if you decide you're gonna have a wedding every weekend, somebody's gonna throw a tent up and put a band in the field. Does that just happen?
I mean, events, you know, can be regulated by a sort of town ordinance, you know, but, and, you know, my function as a zoning administrator is to, you know, enforce our land use regulations. So I can discover, either by someone communicating it to me or seeing it myself, and proactively approach the landowner and say, you know, it appears you're in violation, let's fix this for you, or, you know, bring them to a formal notice of violation.
But would they be in violation though, you know, of that kind of an event? If someone said, we're gonna have, you know, 10 food trucks here and we're gonna have a wedding over the weekend, and say, well, you know, we're serving food from the farm, so it's a farm ag related thing. And it's a social thing. It says we can have social things. It says we can feed people, and it says we can have entertainment. So at what point do you say that they're, you know, they're fully in compliance, and the neighbors have to now put up with having a, you know, that next, maybe that's fine. Maybe that's just what happens, but I wouldn't want it.
I mean, if you know, sort of for an existing use, I mean, an existing on-farm business, even though we don't have it in our land use regulations, if they expand, they begin to offer, a weekly tasting event at, Friday at 4, which is
Yeah.
gin and pizza. A rowdy event. That in itself is an expansion of use that can be reviewed. So I would ask them, you're in violation because we haven't reviewed this expansion of this use. So as something expands and, there is potential for adverse outcomes, the municipality has the authority to find them in violation and, bring them into compliance through a site
Yeah.
plan review.
So I think this is a good topic, and I'd like to keep it in mind. It's somewhat separate from the meat and potatoes of the language of the bylaws, but it is the change in use and how people know what they need permitted and what neighbors know they might come and wave a flag and go talk to Stephen and so forth. But it's a good topic. I just want to keep moving a little bit. Christian, did you have something to add? And then Jeff Lubell.
I would just, Stephen, can we add, I'm just finding on the internet, there's Vermont Act 181 accessory on-farm business fact sheet. If we could add that to the packet for next time for this discussion, I think it might clear up a lot of the questions people are having. It's related to the 2004 Act 181, and they basically lay out a lot of the concerns people here are raising. So people could
Okay.
review that in advance of the next meeting.
Yeah.
It clearly spells out like where the town, like what qualifies as a farm, like how much of the produce has to be made there, what events qualify as agricultural events, and the frequency
Yeah,
that they're allowed to
yeah.
be. And it's very clear as to where the exemptions under Act 250 are granted and not granted. For example, on a farm stand versus an event versus housing, like it's all laid out. So I think that might help before we regroup with this next meeting.
Mm-hmm. I think
Sure.
you sent me that link, Stephen. I think that was helpful. Okay. Jeff Lubell?
Yeah, thank you. I am in favor of the accessory on-farm business language. I think it's great that we're putting this in there. I just want to flag one thing because you mentioned that it will have to go through site plan review. So one of the provisions of site plan review, I made this comment on open air market, so you can see the language there, but it applies to accessory on-farm businesses too. One of the requirements in rural residential is that you not put something on prime ag soil. And I think that's just not practical when it comes to an accessory on-farm business, because by definition, it's going to probably be on prime ag soil, right? If you look at the map of prime ag soil, it's like lots of places that you would not expect in Norwich are considered prime ag soil. And if you say that an accessory on-farm dwelling unit or an open air market can't be on prime ag soil, then you're basically saying it can't happen in Norwich or a lot of Norwich. And so I would encourage you for both of them to exempt that specific part of site plan review, so that we're not, inadvertently sort of depressing the use of these things.
Okay. Yeah. Jeff?
Yeah, so I don't know how to keep this simple, but I'll give it a whirl. I'm not concerned about the ag soil thing, especially locally, because the DRB has flexibility with waivers. I think the ag soil, I don't remember what sub-criterion it is, 9 Ellis sprawl, so it's before that. Any parcel that's 10 acres or larger with any of these proposed uses, in theory, requires an Act 250 permit. So, but I'd like to say, simply put, we've had a bunch of uses in town from, I'm not going to name specifically, that are out of compliance with both local, the local zoning, the local regulations, and Act 250. And so if we make these changes, as Stephen says, going forward, now to the extent there's a modification, there needs to be an update. So any parcel that's 10 acres or 10 acres or more with a commercial use, including most of what we've talked about, requires Act 250 permitting, and it's a rather lengthy process. For me, I don't have a problem looking at all three of these and saying, let's go with them, so long as in that little checkbox that talks about how the DRB looks at these, calls them out as conditional use review. in which case the DRB is going to pay close scrutiny or scrutiny to the extent each use is required.
Yeah.
There are other state provisions that apply with respect to water, wastewater, 25 non-transient, transient people, yada, yada. So I'm not going to propose any changes as long as, since it's townwide, I'd like to say, and it's not, let me restate that. Townwide, any parcel under 10 acres doesn't require Act 250. I'd like to put the conditional use threshold on all of these proposed uses.
Any use?
All three of these, the accessory on-farm business, the open air market, and the accessory on-farm business, because there's so many parcels in town that fly under the wire of higher scrutiny.
I might have misspoke earlier. Accessory on-farm businesses can be regulated through a site plan process, but not a conditional use process.
So by law, that
Statutes.
one's exempt.
Yeah.
If that's the case by law,
Then that's what we got. But
Retract
the
it.
point is,
Everything
there
else-
is a review process.
Yeah.
Okay,
where I'm going is because it's town-wide, I want to go conditional use except to the extent it violates town law.
yeah. Can we just ask for a consensus around that statement? I think the point is, because there is a mechanism, there is the DRB, there is a condition, there is a site review, this is how we would review such a project that exists. Does that make people feel like it's acceptable to call, if these are conditional uses, that gives them enough scrutiny, sort of a baseline of safety to allow them as conditional uses in all districts? Do we have consensus on that? Just a second, Jeff. Okay. I think so. Yes, Jeff Lubell.
Yeah, thank you. So first of all, my understanding from Stephen is that you cannot make accessory on-farm businesses a conditional use, that you have to.
Right. That's a specific statutory.
Okay. So I just want to be clear.
That's not called that.
So what we're really saying here, and we're also exempting roadside agricultural stands, right, from review. So that's not a conditional use either, right? That's just exempt. So the thing that, just to be clear, what you're saying is that the one thing that's going to be a conditional use is an open air market, and I'm totally fine with that. I think conditional use is appropriate, but I just want to clarify that I think that's what you say. And then I also really want to encourage you for open air markets to just say, I think conditional use makes a lot of sense. They need to be tested, parking, et cetera, whatever. But when you do the site plan review, just would encourage you to exempt, as it indicates in that comment there, exempt those two provisions, because it doesn't make sense to apply the prime ag soil, and you don't want them to be rejected because of that. And also, if someone's doing let's say it's a farmer's market of some kind and they want to build a structure, there may not already be such a structure in the rural residential, and you don't want to sort of ding them because it's never been done before. So it's a very small thing. It's not to conditional use, but it's a change to the site plan review. And we just encourage you to make those changes.
Okay, Stephen?
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely agree with the point you're raising, Jeff. I would suggest that rather than exempting a specific use from a specific section of our bylaw, that we take a close look at what 503 B, 4B, and 4C are saying. In particular, so these are under a category of sort of district standards, where for each district we have a set of review standards. I think in particular, D4B, building shall be designed in a manner that is compatible with architectural styles within the district. This is for rural residential, which is 80% of the land. So, I mean, that there is no architectural standard that you can reliably, stand on. It's most of the residences in the town of Norwich. So with what is, how is anybody going to be compatible with that? we could
Or
probably find
incompatible.
incompatible. And
Either
I think
way,
that's-
there's
Yeah,
there's a
so-
wide variation to,
If you
Yeah.
want to eliminate these entirely from the rural residential site plan review, I would support that too. I just am really worried about an agricultural on-farm business. You're going to come in
Yeah.
and you're going to build something and people are going to say, we don't got one of those. We don't have a store yet in rural residential. How can we have a store? You know, it doesn't comply with this. So you either need to exempt it for this particular use, or you just need to get rid of it in the rural residential site plan review. And I would say that's true about prime ag soil too. There's prime ag soil everywhere. Like, I agree with Jeff. If it's above 10 acres and it's prime ag soil, it's going to go to, you
Yeah.
know,
I think,
but actually
Okay.
50, that's fine.
what I would recommend is that we look at those specific district standards, sort of at large as they would apply in the conditional use review process, with an eye to removing them.
Okay. So can we, are we in a good place on this section for tonight's, we've chewed this one enough for tonight? Stephen, you got enough to sort of clean things up and lock it down a little bit?
Yeah, and I'd like, I'd like to make some recommendations around, these specific district characteristics, standards, which I'll provide as I've been providing background for other topics.
Okay.
If that's okay with you guys.
Okay. All right, so let's make we're making good progress here. Let's try and tackle at least one, maybe two more, and then we'll do a couple of admin things before we turn into pumpkins.
Yep.
30. So we have a specific recommendation from the Affordable Housing Subcommittee relative to a density bonus as part of a PUD to increase the density bonus given for affordable housing as part of a PUD. Stephen, do you have any background you want to give?
Yeah, I'd like to suggest for like these items that are marked for review, this is the first time, I mean, with the exception of the conditional use one, the first time the members have really seen it. So
Yeah.
I think it would be appropriate to identify, sort of large, topics, portions of this that require clarification from the members, so I can provide background similar to what I did last month.
Okay.
These topics.
Is this, I hear you, and that's definitely what we want to do for these, as they come across the bow for the first time. We want to know,
Yeah.
what do we need to know to talk intelligently about it. This one at least seems more straightforward to me, at least in the intent. The intent is to say, if you're doing a PUD, which is a certain number of units, you get, you're allowed to build more units if they have certain affordability requirements. So that one to me is at least the intent is pretty straightforward. And exactly how much of an extra penny you give them and so forth is what we're talking about. But the intent it's a pretty limited slice of the type of projects that are done in town. And that's why I think it's pretty straightforward. It's PUDs with a fair number of units, which we don't have a lot of in town. Do you want to give us a kind of a quick statement from the subcommittee, Jeff? Lou Bell?
Yeah, I would. Again, I'm speaking only for myself, but I'll try to represent as best I can what the subcommittee, I mean, what we're trying to do is be responsive to what we're hearing from the planning commission. Every time I've been at a planning commission meeting, you've said you want to promote affordability, right? We wanted, how do we make stuff more affordable? That's like your overwhelming priority. And the other thing I heard was, we can't do a big zoning rewrite. Like, this is like, what are the targeted things that we can do relatively simply with a very small change that would make a difference? And we talked it over, and this was one that's very straightforward. There's already a density bonus. It already says that if you build You know, if you meet certain affordability requirements of, you know, at least half or more of the units are affordable, then you get to build you know, a 50% density bonus if it's a PUD. And that has not been used. The provision has not been used. So it's clear, you know, so there's a variety of potential explanations, but one is that it's not powerful enough, that it's not enough of an incentive. And so with the stroke of a pen, you could increase that. We're not proposing to increase it a ton. We're just proposing to increase it a little bit. So right now, for example, if you could normally do 6 units, with a density bonus, you can do 9. We're saying, let's take that to 12, right? And so, and half of those would have to be affordable in order to do that. And so we think this, you know, will this completely change everything? No, but will it modestly increase the incentives to build affordable housing? Absolutely. And we have, in my view, we have our density is so low already, like we could really increase our density. It would be great to see higher permissible density. But until you're ready to do that, I feel like this is a relatively simple thing you could do with a stroke of a pen that will at least send a signal that we want more affordable housing and might actually get some stuff built.
Okay. Jeff Goodrich?
Yeah, I'm a member of the Affordable Housing Subcommittee too. I mean, I agree with Jeff. This is pretty straightforward. I support.
Are there any, do we have general agreement from the group on the intent? I agree with the statements that clearly the impression or the statements out of this group have been whatever mechanisms we have to push towards affordability, we want to use. So any idea that gets us there or gets us in that direction, I think we're going to support. Ernie?
I'm not convinced that bonus densities do anything, to be honest. We haven't built any affordable housing really to speak of, you know, in a very long time. And instead, what housing that is here that was affordable at one time is now the market has driven their values up too. I think that there should be some sort of simple, if you want to come in and develop something, you got to have a minimum amount of it, and it should be a significant minimum amount because we've got so much market here, market rate stuff. We don't need any more. We need the affordable housing. We don't need more market rate stuff because market in this town is now becoming close to $1 million at a whack. This is stupid. We got to be a lot more assertive about what we want and how we're going to get it. And giving, you know, trying to do the carrot routine is not working. We still haven't with the carrots that we have had. And I don't think giving them even more ability to put more market housing in the town is going to get us more affordable housing. It's only good. And what affordable housing we might get if someone does accept this, some developers do accept this, is we'll still have more people that can afford more taxes and keep on putting pressure on the people that need affordable housing, and they won't be able to stay here because already there is a mindset in this town that cost is no object because we're actually sticking other people with money, with the cost. It's not just us. And I think the bonus is just a bad idea in general. And I'd really just like to see it gone because it hasn't worked yet. What makes us think it's going to work if we, you know, put the metal down on the, you know, if we try to even double down on a bad bet.
So I hear you, Ernie, but I guess my question would be for the group to think through. There's this proposal, which, as you say, is a carrot. And to your point, it doesn't seem to have a negative. It may not move the needle compared to what we already had. But what you're talking about separate from this is a stick in the sense of if somebody comes and wants to build X number of units, there's a definitive statement that some percentage need to be affordable.
Yes.
Not because it's a density bonus, but because that's what we're requiring.
because that's what we
That's
need.
the difference. That's the stick versus the carrot that you're proposing.
Right, because like I said, we need the affordable housing. We don't need any more market housing. It's as simple as that. We
Well,
don't,
and it always, so I guess I'd open that up just for a few minutes. I would be curious. And again, we start with what we statutorily are allowed to do, but I would be curious to ask the group, what is your stomach for requiring things? You know, what are we allowed to require, and what does this group feel, you know, they would want to do? Jeff?
Yeah, so I agree with Ernie in terms of you know, our demographics, our wealthy demographics, McMansion's need for affordable housing. But for me personally, that's a different subject than what's in what Jeff Lubell has summarized, because you know, I work for a lot of folks, and person that's got cash is not going to come in and subdivide. They're going to come in and buy that $1.5 million piece of property and build a $6 million home on it. So to me, to find someone who's willing to subdivide land, and that has not been to create any amount of housing, including some affordable housing, to me has nothing to do with the preponderance of folks who've come in and bought property in this town for the last 25, 30 years. So while I appreciate and agree, I think largely with what Ernie was saying and something Mary alluded to earlier, I think if someone's willing to subdivide, let's encourage the affordability through this kind of mechanism.
I guess to my first question on Ernie's is what's the negative to it? I mean, this is a pretty narrow band of the housing that happens in town, to the point of doesn't happen very often. But what is the negative to having this language on the books with a larger incentive? And put that to the group. Ernie?
well, first of all, I don't see any negatives. I think I expressed that already.
Yeah.
But I will say that a whole state that I'm familiar with had a requirement. It wasn't a very good, very enough, but at least it's still on the books too. It's been on the books for quite a while, and the developers must comply with it. In Massachusetts, any development over a certain amount, and I don't know how big it is. It might not. I don't even know if it's got a minimum amount. It might be just any development requires a certain percentage of low income housing or affordable housing. I don't know if it's low income or if it's affordable, but the point is that's been on the books. I don't know how many decades. As long as I have been paying attention to this issue, and obviously I lived there for the first half of my life. It was in place back then. So, and it works because no one gets out of it.
Mm-hmm. Jeff Lubell?
Yeah, I just want to say that I sympathize with what Ernie's saying. I do work around the country on affordable housing, and I, in many cases, recommend requirements that housing developments over a certain size be affordable. But these are places where the economics actually work to build 20, 40, 100 units at a time. And you can say of that 100 units, you know, 10 need to be affordable or whatever. You know, these are places with water, wastewater. You always have to remember when you have a requirement that, you know, the math has to still work, right? So if you require affordability and that makes the math not work, then the development won't happen. Now you may say, I'm fine, I don't want the development to happen. But here we want the development to happen if it's affordable, right? And so that's why you do an incentive rather than a requirement, because we don't have the math to make it work, because we can't do a large number of units because we don't have water and wastewater. So I would just say that it's possible this won't work. It's possible this is not strong enough, but it's stronger than what we have. And I completely agree with Jeff Goodrich. We want someone to come in and take a look at that property and say, not can I build another $6 million mansion, but can I subdivide that property into 12 lots and make half of them affordable, and I'll make just as much money, and we'll do more good for the city for the town. And right, so that's what we're trying to do, is give them an economic incentive to do that. So it's simple, it's elegant. Hopefully it will work. It might not, but it's better than what we have. And we're not in a position, I don't think, economically to make the requirements work.
Okay. Ernie, can you have something new to add, or can we, I think we've chewed on it a bit, and I'd like to let people think about it to the next meeting, but if you have something. you
Well,
wanna clarify.
this is something I've been thinking about a lot, so I can wait. Because I think, I just want to say what Jeff has just explained is true. Up to a point, well, it's true, period. But the point is that it hasn't, things haven't changed. You know, I mean, Massachusetts, he's right. I think it is 10%, but everyone's required to do it. It might be a little bit more than that, but it doesn't really matter. The point is that nothing really works. And the excuse that the land is expensive and you can't have a mission, all of that is, from my point of view, a lack of imagination and a lack of actually really trying hard. I have a personal experience with trying to do a very, very small piece of affordable housing development in the town. And I was unable to do it because I couldn't get the price was so cheap. It's ridiculous. And simply, I got outbid at the very last minute while I'm waiting for the loan. And so there's now 2 less affordable housing units in the town. And instead, it's just now some sort of luxury little lodge that somebody built for their guests. And it was a perfect place because from my point of view, the house had already been owned by modest people of modest means, raising handicapped children as well as one of their own, all kinds of things. And it was in a pleasant place. It wasn't some sort of ghetto near a antenna and a dump. It was out in northern Norwich. Had access to a paved road, all kinds of good stuff. That didn't happen.
Okay. Yeah.
Because of the same because of the excuses that this is too
Right.
hard to do.
Right. Yeah, so I would like us to, as we said, we've been looking for creative mechanisms to encourage affordability. This is clearly not new to the state. It's clearly a big deal. There are ideas bouncing around. We're not going to solve it tonight. So I think we've chewed on it enough for tonight. Bob, did you have something quick on this topic before we move on?
I just say, I mean, this is less on the density bonus for this size of thing, but we were just talking earlier about ADUs and kind of an and or proposition. I mean, this might fit into, we know that certainly with Ernie, and I've heard from other people, I know with the new housing group, at least one person talked about their own focus on having a house, having an apartment, and wanting to keep it affordable. Maybe we can say what we will about the developer and whether or not they'll do the work. We also have, just throw this out there more so I can discuss it with Stephen later, but maybe this and or that we were talking about before with an accessory dwelling unit, whether it's a separate unit or an existing unit could become an and if one of those were or fits into
Yeah.
people.
You're killing us.
And-
Your audio sucks, Bob. It's hard to hear, but I agree
All right.
to paraphrase
I'll
because
talk
I
with
think
Stephen about it, but yeah.
it's a very good point. And I think, again, we're looking for good ideas to make affordable housing more likely to happen. And I think what you're saying, and I would ask Stephen or anybody who wants to creatively think of this, we're looking for mechanisms. So say it's an ADU, or to what Bob was talking about, a second ADU on a property that can do it. What can the town do to make it affordable? Now, is that a tax credit thing? Is that a how do you encourage it? How do you make it stay that way? You know, what's the mechanism to make it permanent or long-term, short-term rental? So we've got a few ideas bouncing around. But I think that's one, Bob, that's a good idea, rather than, because we don't have a lot of 10, 12, 20 unit PUDs that get built, but we do have a lot of opportunities to ADUs. If we could come up with something that said, hey, if you make an ADU, or if you think you can squeeze in a second ADU on an outbuilding, if you can make it affordable to these criteria, then here's what we'll do with property taxes, or here's what we'll do with permitting or whatever. I think that's something worth exploring.
I just
And
wanted
we-
to, I
Yeah,
just wanted to
just
ask.
quickly, Ernie.
Yeah, did you just recapitulate what Bob said? Because
Yes,
I
I did.
understand the
Yeah,
word.
he was talking
Okay.
about where we had capped it right now at one ADU, as part of the conversation of adding a possible second ADU, tying it up somehow with an affordability limit or incentive.
I agree with that.
Yeah. Okay. Stephen, I would just ask, to your point, that for the things that we're sort of seeing for the first time, we get a little background and a little chance to chew on them.
Yeah,
And if we can do that, we'll give it, say, 7 minutes here, on the conditional similar uses for DRB review,
yeah,
and waivers, which to my mind I'm kind of clumping to say DRB flexibility in our bylaws, in our regs. Can you give us just a little bit of background on those so we can chew on them before next meeting?
sure. So, following on the email I circulated to the members a couple weeks ago, if a use is not specifically outlined in a district as either conditional or by right, then it's prohibited. If you follow the sort of letter of the law in our bylaws. This other uses gives the DRB the authority to review similar uses. So, and I laid out a number of examples in that email. Say, for example, if somebody wants to open a funeral home in the village commercial district, that proposal would be DOA, because that use is
So to
prohibited.
speak. No pun intended. Yes.
Nice.
No pun intended. No pun intended. Since that use is prohibited. So, the DRB, as the sort of judicial branch of municipal government, has the authority to, apply conditions upon uses. There is a well-known process by which they review uses to apply conditions on. I think we need to give the DRB the flexibility to consider uses that are not specifically listed and not automatically prohibit.
Can
So
you,
that's sort of the idea.
does
that.
that link that to the idea of waivers? How are
Okay.
waivers the same or different than that topic?
Waivers are very different. So a waiver, I think a lot of people use the term variance and waiver interchangeably. But really what most people are talking about is, a waiver of some standard. So it's often dimensional standards. So if you have a plan that proposes to, encroach on a setback, say you have a non-conforming lot, a small lot. Right now, the DRB has no authority to waive any dimensional standards on an application. So again, that's, in a situation that wasn't created by the applicant, they're unable to, proceed with their plans because they can't comply with some dimensional requirement. The waiver authority gives the DRB the ability to waive dimensional standards. Only, I mean, but they have to be, there has to be the criteria upon which that decision is made has to be explicit. And it has to, the process to appeal that waiver needs to be explicit in the bylaws. So the bylaws can, have, gives that authority, but it needs to be specific about appeal process and the criteria upon which the DRB uses. So in the explainer document that I gave you guys, I lay out the waiver authority and give 2 examples of other municipal regulations and how they handle it for your review.
Okay. So just in a second, Jeff, I would ask people to ask questions either now or to Stephen separately or background to say, okay, I think I understand the big picture of what's being proposed. Can you answer this question, show examples, whatever. So that's the stage we are with these 2 points. Jeff?
Yeah, I've had occasion to talk to Steve more than once. I really appreciate the direction that he's suggesting here for F, G, and H under the zoning regulation review. I'm going to throw in the certificate of occupancy process too, in consideration of caring for applicants. So my short summary is I like the direction all 3 of these are headed in.
Okay.
Okay.
Great. So I would encourage everyone to review this. This is a new one or a fresh one. Ask questions, and then we'll bring it back up to next time with whatever those questions are with more detail and have some more time to dig into it. Okay. Great.
Yeah.
You had a quick one, Stephen, on a grant program.
Yeah, the 2025 municipal planning grant opportunity has opened as of January 31st. We have until March 31st to apply. In the email that I circulated, and I don't have it in front of me. There's a number of priorities, state recognized priorities that a winning proposal would address. I just wanted to, bring this to your attention. If this is something that members of the Planning Commission would like to pursue in some capacity, I'm here to support that activity. I've also asked the Affordable Housing Committee subcommittee if they have any interest in pursuing this grant. It doesn't necessarily have to tie into the Planning Commission. I've done a municipal planning grant for a Trails Committee. So as my function here, sort of, Director of Planning Services for the town of Norwich, I'm going to sort of bring this to the attention of all of the committees with deference to the Planning Commission for first choice.
Yeah, with proper deference to the Planning Commission, I would argue. Yeah.
Yeah.
Jeff?
So,
are you asking for ideas? Or do you have
do you guys
specific
have any
proposals?
ideas? Yeah, I mean, do you have any ideas? In any stage, we can sort of, bring it out in detail. But if there's any thoughts that any of you guys have about, an idea you'd like to fund,
I don't know. Just to put it on the table. And I don't know whether this would benefit from a grant or would need a grant, but we have something on the table, which is to redo our scenic resources inventory. And we talked about, we can do that. The town can do that with drive, we can do that as a bootstrap community effort. But that's just one I would throw on the table for an idea. Jeff?
Yeah, we had a shared use path grant from downtown to, or at least Route 5 or 10A to basically the town of Hartford border. It was initially granted following the town of Hartford's shared use path that implementation that went to the Dothan Brook School. So, for me, a key priority would be, because we had our rec fields out there, et cetera, resurrecting the shared youth path.
Okay.
Or the shared use corridor, as far as we can get it down Route 5.
Yep. Good.
Okay.
So I
that
guess I
is-
would just add, so Stephen, in terms of timing, we'll have another meeting before, and you'll still have time to follow up on these. So
Yeah,
if people
yeah.
can, if we assume we'll give an agenda item in the next meeting, and people can lob ideas at you, and we'll have a short list of those for discussion next time.
Yeah, and anything you can get to me in the sort of intermediate period of time, the better, so I can sort of flesh it out.
Yep. Good.
Yep,
That'd be good.
but I do have these
Okay.
two ideas. Yep.
Yep. So on the minutes for the 14th, I had one change, Vince, on
Motion, hey, Jan,
Oh.
motion to approve?
Yeah, let's do a motion in a second, and then we'll discuss. Do I have a second?
Second.
All right. Thank you, Bob. All right. Discussion. So the change that I had, and I think under ADUs and housing, that first bullet under 4, where it says the group also discussed ADU short-term rental policy. Actually, as we talked about today, it can't be just an ADU short-term rental policy. It should be, strike ADU, and that would be accurate, because it was the overall topic of short-term rental policy. And now we can see that by state law, it has to be the overall topic.
Okay, so just no ADU and we're good.
Just nix ADU, it'll work, yep. Any other edits to those minutes? All those in favor of approving the minutes as amended?
Aye.
Right.
Unanimous?
Great.
Public comment, seeing no public, I think we're safe on that one.
So do we have 2 minutes to talk amongst ourselves now, or what?
No, I think someone's gonna move to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Second.
All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
We have given you 1 minute of your life back. Thank you all.
Thank you very much.